I woke up to the sound of metal slamming into dirt, not like construction down the road, not like some neighbor fixing a mailbox. No, this was close, too close, like right outside my window. I remember standing there in my kitchen, barefoot, holding a coffee mug that suddenly felt a lot heavier than it should have, and thinking, who the hell is doing yard work at 7 a.m. like they've got something to prove? So I step outside, still half asleep, still expecting something normal, and that's when I see it. A crew of 5 guys, neon vests, heavy equipment, one of those post drivers just hammering steel stakes straight into the ground, my ground. Not near the edge, not even close. I'm talking dead center through my vegetable garden, right where my tomatoes had finally started coming in after weeks of fighting off squirrels like it was a full-time job. And the line they were building, it wasn't random. It was straight, clean, intentional, like someone had drawn a knife across my property and said, "This half? Not yours anymore." I just stood there for a second, trying to process it. Then I walked straight up to the guy in charge and said, "Hey, what exactly do you think you're doing?" He didn't even look surprised. That's the part that stuck with me. He just wiped his hands, pulled out a folded piece of paper like he'd been waiting for this exact moment, and said, "We're installing a boundary fence, sir. Survey says this is the property line." Survey says. I almost laughed, because I knew where my property line was. I didn't guess it, I didn't eyeball it. I had documents, official records, iron stakes in the ground that had been there longer than most of the houses on this street. My family had owned that land for over 3 decades. Birthdays, barbecues, late nights on the porch listening to crickets. Everything happened on that land. So I told him, that line's wrong. And he just shrugged. Actually shrugged. Like I had just told him the weather forecast might be off. That's when I saw the direction the fence was heading, past the garden, past the oak tree, straight toward the back of my house. And I mean straight at it. Like if they kept going, they'd hit my kitchen wall without even slowing down. 15 feet. That's how close the last stake was to my back door. 15 feet between me and a fence that apparently wasn't supposed to be mine anymore. And then it clicked. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. Because 6 weeks earlier, I had met the guy who started all of this. His name was Victor Hale, retired finance guy, moved in from out of state, the kind of man who smiles like he's already won something you didn't know you were competing for. First time I saw him, he was standing in my driveway holding a rolled-up blueprint like he was about to pitch me a business deal instead of introduce himself. "Hey there, neighbor," he said, real smooth, like we'd known each other for years. "Thought we should talk about the property line between our lots." Now, I remember thinking that was odd, because there was nothing to talk about. The line had been set since before either of us were living there. So I told him exactly that. It's already established. And he just chuckled, not a friendly chuckle either, more like the kind you give when someone says something naive. Then he looked at me, tilted his head slightly, and said, "We'll see about that." At the time, I brushed it off. Figured maybe he was one of those guys who needed to feel in control of everything. Maybe just bored in retirement. I didn't think it would turn into this. But now, standing in my backyard watching strangers carve up my land like it was a construction site they owned. Yeah, that sentence hit different. So I pulled out my phone and called him. He answered on the second ring. No hesitation. Victor Hale speaking. I didn't even bother with small talk. Why is there a crew building a fence through my yard? And I swear to you, I could hear the smile in his voice. "Oh, good morning," he said, like this was casual, like we were discussing lawn care tips. "Yeah, about that. We had the property resurveyed. Turns out the original records from the 80s were inaccurate." "Inaccurate? By about 30 feet, he said. "Which means that section of land, my land, is actually part of our property now, legally speaking." I felt something in my chest drop. Not fear, not exactly, more like disbelief turning into anger in real time. "You're telling me," I said slowly, "that my garden, my shed, my kitchen—" "Well," he cut in, still calm, still that same tone like he was explaining interest rates. You do have options. You could relocate those structures, or we could work out a lease agreement. A lease. For my own kitchen. I actually laughed then, not because it was funny, but because my brain didn't know what else to do with that level of audacity. You're out of your mind, I said. And he didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, just said, if you disagree, you're welcome to take it up with the county. Click. He hung up first. And that right there is when it stopped being a misunderstanding and became a war. I went back inside, pulled out every document I had, original deed, survey maps, county records, even the old paperwork my dad kept in a box labeled, "Do not throw away." And I drove straight to someone who actually knew how to deal with people like Victor Hale. Her name was Rachel Carter, and within 10 minutes of looking at my documents, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Yeah, this isn't just aggressive. This is fraudulent." And that's when I realized this wasn't just about a fence. This was about someone trying to rewrite reality and hoping I'd be too confused, too intimidated, or too tired to fight back. And honestly, for about 5 minutes, it almost worked. Now let me pause the story for a second, because what Victor tried to pull here, it's not new, and it's definitely not random. This kind of move sits right at the intersection of legal gray areas and psychological pressure tactics, and if you don't recognize it early, you're already behind. According to standard procedure, property boundaries in the U.S. aren't something you just update because you hired a new surveyor. Once a boundary is recorded with the county and backed by an official plat map, it becomes legally binding unless challenged and corrected through a formal legal process. That means court involvement, historical records, and usually multiple expert validations, not just one guy with a clipboard saying, "Yeah, looks like 30 feet off." From a legal perspective, what Victor did was a classic escalation strategy. He didn't start with a lawsuit. He started with action. He put workers on the ground, started building the fence, created a physical reality first, because once something exists in the real world, it becomes harder, emotionally and sometimes legally, to undo. It's a pressure play. If I panic, if I hesitate, if I think, maybe I'm wrong, he gains ground without ever proving his claim. And then there's the psychological side of it. This is where it gets interesting. This is a psychological trap. When someone confidently presents false authority, like a new survey or legal jargon, they're not just making a claim, they're testing your reaction. Most people, when confronted with something that sounds official, freeze. They second-guess themselves. They start negotiating before they even verify the facts. That lease offer? That wasn't a compromise. That was bait. Because the moment I agree to lease land I already own, even temporarily, I'm validating his claim. I'm stepping into his version of reality. And once you do that, climbing back out gets a whole lot harder. And one more thing, this kind of behavior often ties back to control. Guys like Victor don't just want the land, they want to win. They want to prove they can outmaneuver you, outspend you, outlast you. It's not about 30 feet of dirt. It's about dominance wrapped in paperwork. The lesson here is, when someone moves fast and confidently in a legal situation, don't match their speed, match their accuracy. Because in cases like this, the person who slows down, checks the facts, and plays by the actual rules usually ends up holding all the cards. So after Rachel said the word fraudulent, everything shifted, not emotionally. I was still pissed, but strategically. Because now it wasn't just me reacting to some guy building a fence. Now I had a direction, a plan, and someone who knew exactly how to dismantle whatever game Victor thought he was playing. Rachel didn't waste time. She picked up the phone, called the county records office right in front of me, pulled archived plats, cross-referenced surveys going back decades, like she'd done this 100 times before, and then she looked at me and said, "We're filing an emergency injunction today." And just like that, it became official. By the end of the afternoon, paperwork was filed, motions submitted, and a temporary halt order requested to stop further construction. But here's the thing about people like Victor. They don't back down when challenged. They double down. Because the very next morning, I got served. Yeah, served. A legal packet, thick, neatly organized, stamped by a law firm from out of town. Big firm too, the kind that charges by the minute and writes letters like they're trying to intimidate you before you even finish page one. Victor wasn't just defending himself, he was counterattacking. They claimed boundary ambiguity, cited something called adverse possession, and argued that the land had historically been misrepresented. They even had the nerve, the absolute nerve, to demand that I remove my shed because it was encroaching onto what they now considered their property. My shed, on my land, that had been there longer than Victor had lived in the state. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading through that document, line by line, feeling this mix of anger and disbelief. But Rachel? She just smiled. Not a happy smile. This is about to get interesting kind of smile. They're overplaying their hand, she said. And judges hate that. Now here's where things start moving fast. Court dates, filings, responses, it all compressed into what felt like a few days, even though it was probably a couple of weeks. And during that time, the fence? Still there. Half built, cutting through my yard like a scar. A daily reminder of what happens when someone thinks they can just take what's yours and dare you to stop them. Then came the hearing. Small courtroom. Nothing dramatic like TV. No shouting. No surprise witnesses kicking open doors. But there was tension. The kind you feel in your chest, like something's about to snap. Victor was there, of course, dressed sharp, confident, sitting next to his attorney like they'd already won. He didn't even look at me when I walked in. Which, honestly, told me everything I needed to know about how he saw this whole situation. Rachel and I took our seats. She had a single folder. That's it. No stacks, no theatrics. Just one folder. When the judge, Honorable Judge Whitaker, entered, the room shifted immediately. You could tell she wasn't the type to entertain nonsense. She sat down, reviewed the filings briefly, then looked up and said, "Let's begin." Victor's attorney went first. And I'll give him this, he was smooth. He laid out their argument like it was airtight. Talked about discrepancies in historical measurements, referenced their updated survey, used phrases like reasonable reliance and corrective action. It sounded convincing if you didn't know better. At one point, he even gestured toward me and said, "My client is simply attempting to rectify a long-standing error that unfairly benefited the plaintiff." Unfairly benefited. I almost laughed again. Then it was Rachel's turn. She stood up, calm, composed, walked to the front, and didn't rush. She let the silence sit for a second, just long enough to shift the energy in the room, and then she said, "Your Honor, this isn't a boundary dispute. This is a manufactured one." And then she opened that folder. Inside was everything. Original county records, certified plats from the 1980s, survey documents with official seals, photographs of the iron stakes still in place, tax maps, property descriptions that matched exactly, line for line, inch for inch. She walked the judge through it step by step, no fluff, no exaggeration, just facts. Then she held up Victor's new survey. "This," she said, "is not supported by any historical record, contradicts every official document on file, and was produced without proper verification. In short, it's fabricated." You could feel the shift in the room right there. Judge Whitaker took the documents, reviewed them carefully, then reached for something on her bench, a printed county archive map. Older than anything either side had presented that day. She looked at Victor, really looked at him, and then she said, "Mr. Hale, this boundary was established, recorded, and upheld for over 40 years. Your survey does not override that." Silence. Then came the line that ended everything. "Your claim is invalid." Just like that. No drama. No hesitation. Then she turned slightly, her tone sharper now. "You are ordered to cease all construction immediately. Within 10 days, you will remove any and all structures placed on the plaintiff's property and restore the land to its original condition." She paused, just long enough for it to sink in. If you fail to comply, the plaintiff is authorized to remove those structures himself and bill you for all associated costs. Gavel down. Case closed. Now you'd think that would be the end of it, right? You'd think someone like Victor, after getting shut down that cleanly, would cut his losses, quietly remove the fence, and pretend none of this ever happened. Yeah, no. 10 days came and went, and nothing changed. The fence was still there. Every post, every panel, still standing like he was daring me to follow through. Like he thought I wouldn't actually do it. Day 11. I woke up early again. But this time, it wasn't confusion, it was purpose. I had Rachel on speed dial, a printed copy of the court order in my hand, and scheduled behind me, a demolition crew, a flatbed truck, and 2 sheriff's deputies to make sure everything stayed official. We pulled up just after 8 a.m. Same yard, same fence, different energy. I stepped out of the truck, looked at the crew, and said, "Everything from that line goes." And they didn't hesitate. Sledgehammers swung. Wood cracked. Metal snapped. Posts came out of the ground like they never belonged there in the first place. It was loud, messy, unapologetic, and I'm not gonna lie, there was something deeply satisfying about watching every piece of that fence come apart. Not out of revenge, but out of correction. Because this wasn't destruction. This was restoration. Halfway through, Victor and his wife showed up. Of course they did. Black SUV, tires hitting gravel a little too fast, doors slamming like punctuation marks. He walked up, furious. Not confused, furious. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. I just handed him the court order. "You had 10 days. He looked at it. Barely, like the paper itself offended him. "You're destroying private property. That fence cost $15,000. I shrugged slightly. "Then you should have built it on your land." That hit. I could see it. But instead of backing down, he doubled down again, because of course he did. He started talking about lawsuits, damages, emotional distress, all the usual threats people throw out when they realize they've lost control of the situation but aren't ready to admit it yet. The deputies stepped in at that point. Calm, professional, but firm. "Sir, you've been ordered by the court to remove this structure. You failed to comply. This action is authorized." And just like that, his leverage disappeared. We finished the job in under 3 hours. Loaded every broken piece onto the truck, cleared the land, left it exactly how it was before he ever touched it. And as we drove off, I looked back at my yard. Open again, whole again, like none of it had ever happened. Except it had. And Victor? Yeah, he wasn't done paying for it yet. So yeah, that should have been the end of it, right? Fence gone, land restored, court order enforced, case closed, everyone goes home. But if there's one thing I learned from this whole mess, it's that people like Victor don't just walk away quietly. They need the last word, even when they've already lost the argument. A couple weeks later, I get another notice. He's suing me. Again. This time, property damage, emotional distress, loss of investment. I mean, he threw everything at the wall hoping something would stick. And I remember reading it, sitting at that same kitchen table, and just shaking my head like, "Man, you really don't know when to stop, do you?" Rachel didn't even blink. She looked over the filing and said, "Yeah, this won't go anywhere." And she was right. The judge dismissed it. Fast. Clean. No room for interpretation. And then, this part matters, she ordered him to pay for everything. My legal fees, the cost of demolition, all of it. Total bill? Just over 40 grand. $40,000 to learn a lesson he could have avoided by just staying on his side of the line. Now here's the thing, and this is where I want to shift from just telling you what happened to why it matters. Because stories like this, they're entertaining, sure. There's drama, conflict, a clear win at the end, but if that's all you take from it, you're missing the real value. The lesson here is, boundaries aren't just physical, they're psychological, legal, and sometimes even emotional. And the moment someone tests one, They're not just asking, is this mine? They're asking, will you defend it? From a legal perspective, documentation is everything. I didn't win because I argued louder. I didn't win because I showed up angrier. I won because I had records. Clear, consistent, verifiable records. Deeds, surveys, county filings, things that don't care about opinions or confidence. And that's something a lot of people overlook. They assume being right is enough. It's not. You have to be provably right. And here's another angle people don't talk about enough: escalation. Victor escalated early. He skipped conversation, skipped compromise, went straight to action: construction crews, legal threats, pressure tactics. And on the surface, that kind of confidence can feel overwhelming. It can make you second-guess yourself, make you wonder if you're already behind. But here's the twist. When someone escalates too fast without a solid foundation, they're not showing strength, they're exposing weakness. Because if your position is truly legitimate, you don't need to rush. You don't need to force reality to match your claim. This is a psychological trap, and it works more often than you think. People see movement, authority, paperwork. They assume legitimacy. They fold before the game even starts. And I get it. Conflict is uncomfortable. Legal stuff is confusing. Most people just want peace, not a drawn-out fight over property lines or paperwork. But sometimes, peace isn't what's being offered. Sometimes it's compliance disguised as compromise. And if you accept that, even once, you set a precedent. Not just legally, but mentally. You teach the other person that your boundaries are flexible, negotiable, optional. Now, I'm not saying every situation needs to turn into a courtroom showdown. That's not realistic, and honestly, it's not healthy. But what I am saying is, you need to recognize when something crosses the line from misunderstanding into manipulation. Because those are two very different situations. A misunderstanding gets solved with conversation. Manipulation? That requires resistance. And one more thing, this whole idea of winning. Yeah, technically I won. The court ruled in my favor. The fence came down. I got compensated. But if I'm being honest, it didn't feel like victory in the way people imagine. It felt like resolution. Like something that shouldn't have happened in the first place finally got corrected. Because at the end of the day, I didn't gain anything new. I just kept what was already mine. And maybe that's the most important takeaway of all. You don't always fight to get ahead. Sometimes, you fight just to not be pushed back. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where someone's moving fast, talking confidently, throwing around terms and documents that sound official but feel off, slow it down. Ask questions. Verify everything. Because according to standard procedure, truth doesn't need to rush. And if someone's trying to pressure you into accepting a new reality overnight, there's a good chance it was never real to begin with. Anyway, I'm curious, what would you have done? Would you have fought it? Would you have negotiated? Or would you have walked away and let them have it?